Welcome to the Essentials of Sketching Architecture. I'm Stephanie Bauer. Drawing buildings can be a little overwhelming. Different styles, shapes, materials, and how do you capture something so large onto a sketchbook page? In this class, you'll learn the essentials for sketching in perspective, how to effectively show building materials, and how to draw challenging forms like arches. By the end, you'll be able to accurately and beautifully capture the buildings and spaces around you. I have a background as an architect and now work as an architectural illustrator. I've also been teaching sketching for many years. I'm the author of the Urban Sketching Handbook, Understanding Perspective, and a blog correspondent and instructor for Urban Sketchers. I'm inspired by amazing architecture, be it grand or humble. I draw to learn about the buildings I see, both on my travels and at home. We'll begin with the basic concepts you'll need to start your sketch. Then we'll discuss ways to accurately add elements like windows, columns, and arches. Building materials have a big impact on your sketch. I'll show you how to quickly incorporate them. And you'll learn how to show sloped surfaces like stairs and roofs. And I'll give you some of my favorite tips for a well-composed and vibrant sketch. Then we'll put it all together on location. Let's get started. Let's start by talking about how we see buildings and the three concepts that are key to sketching architecture. In this lesson, we'll cover 1- and 2-point perspective, finding and using your eye level line, and then a simple 3-step process for putting these together and starting your sketches. So how do we capture our 3-dimensional world onto a 2-dimensional surface like a piece of paper or canvas? We use perspective. Perspective is really just a simple set of rules to help us draw what we see. Once you know what to look for, you'll start to see perspective everywhere, and sketching architecture will be much easier. Probably the most important concept we need to know about sketching in perspective is understanding how we see parallel lines. Lines that are in reality parallel to each other, like the rows of crops in a field, appear to converge to one point off in the distance as those lines recede away from us. That one point off in the distance is called a vanishing point. Here we see two edges of a road parallel to each other in reality, but what we see with our eyes is them converging to a point off in the distance at the entry to the building. And then finally, in this image of a shopping space, we see that parallel lines on the floor, on the ground, on the walls, and even in the ceiling. If they're parallel to each other, they all converge to the same vanishing point in the distance. Most architectural sketches you make will have either 1 or 2 vanishing points. So how does that work? What makes an image have 1 point versus 2 vanishing points? The answer to that question is simple. It's where you were standing and looking relative to what you were drawing. For example, when you're standing in front of a building looking straight ahead, you see a 1-point perspective. If you turn your head or move to an angle, the view shifts just enough to create a 2-point perspective. Let me show you what I mean in these photos. Let's go to Spain, to the iconic Barcelona pavilion. If I sit in this space and want to do a sketch of this, I'm looking straight ahead at that back wall. My line of sight is directly straight ahead, and the wall is perpendicular to my line of sight. So what does that give me? I see one set of lines here as horizontal lines. They're not vanishing at all, or at least very little. And let's get that corner in. Another set of lines is receding away from me, and those are the ones that are vanishing to the vanishing point. Those I can find by extending these lines with my pencil. And I can find where they converge, the ground line, top of the wall. All those parallel lines converge to 1 point. That's the vanishing point. Now, if I turn my head ever so slightly to the right or the left, everything shifts in my view. Suddenly, I've generated now 2 vanishing points. Let's take a look at where those are. So remember, lines that are parallel to each other converge to a common vanishing point. So we're going to still have this one inside our view, right about here, for these lines that are vanishing directly in front of me, but we're also generating another vanishing point off to our right. So if we extend these lines, now let's extend the lines of the bottom of the wall. We see that they converge way off to the right to a point way over here. So vanishing point left, vanishing point right, all just because we shifted our view ever so slightly. We're no longer looking straight on at that wall in a perpendicular way. Now let's take a look at a building exterior to see if we can find the vanishing points here. So often when you're drawing one-point perspectives of the exterior of a building, you pretty much get what we would call an elevation view. We're pretty much just looking at the front face of the building. And that's what we get here. This is a war memorial in Washington, D.C. And let's see if we can find the vanishing point. I can use little lines that are receding away from me. There's one, there's another. You have to really hunt for them when you're doing a one-point perspective of a building facade. Here's another little line. You can extend that to the vanishing point. So the vanishing point for this sketch seems to be right about here, dead center, right in front of me as I'm looking straight ahead at this building. Now let's take a look at a two-point view. And now I've walked to the side and I'm no longer looking at this little pavilion straight on. I'm looking at it at an angle. So it's going to generate two vanishing points. Let's see if we can find them. So lines that are parallel to each other on one side of this building are angling back this way. I just extend them, and in the field you just use your pencil to extend those lines. Here's the corner of the building. Now let's get the lines on the other side. Vanishing that way, vanishing here. Let's just double check it with another little joint line in the stone. So right about there. So we have vanishing point right and a second vanishing point left, and they both should be on the same horizontal line. So that's a two-point perspective. Now let's look at some sketches. This is a one-point perspective of the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth by Louis Kahn. And all of these lines are parallel to each other. The ones in the ceiling, the ones at the top of the wall here, even these lines in the floor, they're all receding away from me and converging to one point in my sketch, right about there. I have to confess that most of the sketches I do are in fact one-point perspectives. They're way easier to draw, and I find them to be really dramatic, and they just pull the viewer right into the sketch. However, there are times when two-point perspectives are really better. So here's an example of a two-point perspective sketch that I did in Bangkok, Thailand. This is a temple outside of, or as part of the Wat Arun complex. And here I decided to do a two-point perspective. We see, if we extend these lines on the left-hand side of this building, there's a vanishing point right about in there. I can actually see my point. And then there's another one just off my page over here to the right. And what I do when I sketch that is I literally just hold up my pencil, measure the angles, and then kind of transfer that angle to my page. I need to do that when the vanishing point is off my paper. Two-point perspectives are actually great for many things. They're very dynamic, and they introduce a lot of movement to the sketch, and they are great for showing 3D volume. I can really understand the form of this building in a two-point perspective sketch. Now let's talk about another concept that makes drawing perspective much easier, your eye level line. I draw my eye level line into every sketch I draw. It's really important, as this is where you'll find most of your vanishing points. Let's look at how this works in this photo of some rooftops in Barcelona. So what's the first thing I'm going to do? I'm going to extend these lines to find where they converge. And the most obvious one is in this building on the right-hand side of my image. So I'm going to try and find my vanishing point here. Lots of lines here that we can extend to converge to the point. So there it is. That's my vanishing point. Let's see if it works for this building on the left. Yes, it does. And this little rooftop edge right there. So there's my vanishing point. It also happens to be the line where the water meets the sky, otherwise known as the horizon line that you hear about so much in perspective. But because most of the time we can't actually see the horizon off in the distance, I find it much more helpful for sketchers to instead think about using their eye level line. Basically, the eye level line and horizon line are the same thing. And here you can really see it. There's the vanishing point, This is my eye level line. This was the height of my eyes above the ground as I was taking this photo. That was the back of my head when I was taking that photo. And the horizon line and the eye level line are the same thing. Finding my eye level line is really easy in a photo once I know where my vanishing point is. But how else can I find my eye level line when I'm sketching on location? Again, we go to our pencil. Hold your pencil out directly in front of your eyes and then pin that line on something in your view. It's helpful to know that when you're sitting, your eye level is usually about the height of a door handle. And when you're standing, your eye level is about 5 feet off the ground or about the height of other people standing in your view. Now let's look at a sketch in perspective. This is Bussorah Street in Singapore. And I'm going to retrace some of my lines here to understand this sketch. All right, so if I extend these lines down here and these lines to here, I can find a vanishing point right over here. So that's one set of parallel lines going to a vanishing point right there. And if I extend these lines on the other side of the street, they go to a slightly different vanishing point, just to the left. So that means the two sides aren't exactly parallel to each other. But this shows us that the eye level is right about in here. It's very low in my sketch. I was sitting on the ground as all these people were walking by, groups of school kids. So my eye level is very low. Another way the eye level line is super useful is when you have it in your sketch as a reference, you know that any line that's receding away from you above it is going to angle down to a vanishing point. So that means all the tops of these the bottom of these canopies, the tops of these canopies, that roof line, they're all going to angle down to a vanishing point. Anything below my eye level line is basically going to be a line angling up to a vanishing point. So it helps you orient yourself in the process of doing a sketch. It's just another little tool to help make sketching a little easier. Let's look at how to incorporate your vanishing point and your eye level line into a simple 3-step process to create the accurate bones of your architectural sketch. Now I'd like you to think like an architect, and instead of starting with a detail or a piece and growing your sketch, start with drawing the big shapes that form the buildings and spaces, the rectangles and squares. This is important because it creates a road map for your sketch, and it shows you within the first few minutes where you're going with your sketch, if the proportions are correct, and if it will all fit on your page. Let's look at this image of the Ballard Locks in Seattle, Washington. The first thing I do when I sit down is I figure out my view, and I'm looking straight ahead at the face of this building, so I know I'm going to generate a 1-point perspective. The next thing I'm going to do is hold up my pencil to try and get the proportions of this building. I want to know the height relative to the width of the building. And I usually line my pencil up on the left-hand side vertical edge. So the top of my pencil lines up with the top of the building, edge of the building, and the bottom of my pencil lines up with the bottom of the building where it hits the ground. And I move my arm back and forth until I get that to line up with one eye closed. And then I drop the pencil and basically measure how many pencil widths the building is. Another thing I can do is look for squares, and I see several squares in this that'll help me do my drawing. So this looks to be about 1 pencil high and probably about 2 1/3 or 2 1/2 pencils wide. So let's put those proportions on our paper and start a sketch. I'm not starting with a piece, I'm starting with the big shapes. So that first line determines the size of my entire sketch. If I start to make it too big now, it's super easy just to erase it out and start over again and make it either smaller or larger. All right, so I get 1, 2, and maybe a little extra. And that gives me enough so I can draw that rectangle. So that's the face of the building. That's the big shape. I can add a little bit to the top because there's kind of a railing at the top. That's the main shape. The next thing I'll do is try and find my vanishing point and eye level line. So when I'm drawing an elevation view like this, there's not a lot of receding lines to choose from on the building because it's really just the face of the building. But I can look for little places like this and a little overhang here. There's a little perspective there. Another real clue is the height of the heads of the people, because when I'm standing there and if the ground is level, all the eyes kind of line up. So that would put the eye level line somewhere right about in here. And then it looks like my vanishing point would be more or less straight in front of me, maybe right about there. So those are the 3 steps. Draw the big shape, extend your lines and find your vanishing point, draw your eye level line in all the way across your sketch. And those are the essentials that you need to pretty much sketch any building. So let me keep working on this a little bit and show you how I fill it out. So we've blocked out just the basics in this very quick sketch, but I wanted to show you one other thing about the vanishing points. Remember, lines that are parallel to each other go to a common vanishing point. But let's take a look at this walkway. So we have this edge here where the locks, the water is down here, and that's the edge of the locks, and I'm referencing it to this edge. It's just to the right of that edge that helps me locate it. But we have another vanishing point. So let's take a look. If I can kind of hold my pencil up and measure that angle a little bit and transfer that to my paper, I get a line that is maybe like this. And if I extend that line to my eye level line, that gives me the vanishing point for this wall. And I can use it now for the bottom part of the wall. Or if I wanted to show it all this wood that's on the siding, or pop up the railing. Same thing for this railing and walkway right over here. It's generating yet another vanishing point. So I approximate that edge, that angle, I extend it up to my eye level line, and that gives me the vanishing point for this walkway. About like that. And the top of the railing too. And the railing here. So it's really helpful to know that lines that are parallel to each other go to a common vanishing point on your eye level line. So now let's try a 2-point perspective of the same building. I'm no longer looking at the straight front facade of this building. I've walked around to the side and now I see 2 sides of the building. So this side of the building on the left is going to vanish to a vanishing point on my left, and then the side of the building that's the front, or kind of to the right, is going to vanish to a point off to the right. That looks like it's going to be well off my sketch. But let's see how to set it up. It's basically the same principles as before, starting with the big shapes, then adding the eye level and the vanishing point. So I'm also going to measure on location with my pencil that same vertical edge, and then measure the width of the faces of this building. But now I need to incorporate the 2 vanishing points. So I usually start with that same left-hand edge, or the edge that's going to give me the most information. So let's try that right about here. Is that going to fit? I think it's going to fit. Now the ground line is pretty close. I know it's going to be pretty close to my eye level line, so it's pretty flat. But on location, to get the roof line, I hold up my pencil, I measure that angle, and then transfer that angle to my paper, because the vanishing point is so far off my page. But let's just get the shape of that box. It's maybe something like that. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be close. Now let's get the other side. And it looks like we will have a vanishing point that'll fit on our page here. So again, I hold this up, I measure that angle. It looks to be something like that maybe. Then the ground line I know is going to be flatter. And I can kind of eyeball this distance. I can also use my pencil to measure this dimension here to get a sense for the depth. So there's the shape of the box, more or less. Now I need to put in my eye level line and find that vanishing point. Well, let's go for the vanishing point first, because this side pretty much tells us where it is. So there's the vanishing point, which means my eye level line and the heads of all those people walking around the Ballard Locks are also going to be right in that line. People, be they in the foreground or the background. So there's the shape of the building. Now I can start to break down those big shapes into smaller shapes. So there we have a really quick sketch of a two-point perspective. It's, again, different from the one point in that first one we were looking straight on, this one we're looking at an angle. One of the vanishing points is off our page, but you can use your pencil to measure. You've learned a few basics for drawing architecture as we see it in perspective. For much more in-depth information on this process, I encourage you to watch my other Craftsy class, Perspective for Sketchers. For homework, I'd like you to find a simple building or space and try sketching it as a one-point perspective, then shift your view and sketch it as a two-point perspective. You'll see immediately how the vanishing points work. In the next lesson, we'll take a look at how to sketch more architectural elements: doors and windows, columns, and even arches.